Either we heal as a team, or we're going to crumble. Inch by inch, play by play, till we're finished. We're in hell right now, gentlemen, believe me. And we can stay here, get the shit kicked out of us, or we can fight our way back into the light. We can climb out of hell. 1 inch at a time. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's going to make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's going to win that inch. And I know if I'm going to have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch. Because that's what living is. There's 6 inches in front of your face. Now I can't make you do it. You got to look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now I think you're going to see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're going to see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're going to do the same for him. That's a team, gentlemen. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Ideas are bulletproof.
Welcome to the show, guys. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. It's May 20th, 2011. This Friday, I have a special show lined up for you. I'm joined by my guest, Steve Stars, today. And Steve and I did a 2-hour show yesterday on Bob Tuskin's radio show about the Titanic and the sinking of the Titanic and the shady things and facts that many people don't know about. So today, I figured I would bring him over as a guest, and even though we don't have 2 hours, we only have an hour, we're going to be covering a condensed version of what we covered last night on Bob Tuskin's radio show. So, without wasting any more time, Steve, say hello.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I hope I'm coming through clear and everything like that. Glad to be back with you, Popeye.
You're coming through nice and loud and clear. We had a great show last night. And
yeah, we
were
did.
Discussing the Titanic and everything. Go ahead and, if you want, tell the listeners pretty much what you know about the sinking of the Titanic and why you think it's a shady, hinky situation.
Well, the first time I heard this, I guess I kind of got to go through the metamorphosis because maybe some of our listeners, aren't quite as tuned to what we've been looking at lately. The first time I heard about the possibility that the Titanic was a deliberate sinking, that it was an act of mass murder rather than an accident at sea, I thought, it's the craziest idea I've ever heard. Come on, you've got to be kidding me. But as I began to look at some of the stuff that was around there and begin to peel back some of the layers and take a little bit look at the investigation of what was going on and started asking some questions as to all the anomalies of how this so-called accident took place, I started seeing things that I had never imagined. And I read Walter Lord's book, A Night to Remember, which, by the way, deals with the Californian issue and a lot of other controversies, which were going on, as we mentioned last night, Popeye, all into the 90s, even before James Cameron's latest, PR release of the sympathetic story of the Titanic accident. I began to look at some of these things, and I thought, I heard these, people like Eric John Phelps and some of these others say that the Jesuits had wrecked the Titanic. I thought, man, that's really way over the top. But as I started looking at this, I started saying, wow, I thought I knew a lot about this. I knew some of the names of the people like Fleet and Lightholder and Phillips and Bright and of course, Captain Edward J. Smith. And there was a very elaborate guest list on this boat. We talked about that last night. John Jacob Astor, the richest man in the world at that time. Guggenheim, the man who owned Macy's, the man who made Levi's, and then, of course, the illustrious Molly Brown. But as I looked at this a little bit more, I started thinking, well, wait a minute. How did this accident happen? Especially, the first place that you look at it is you go, there were so many people warning folks about this ice that was out there in that area. What I didn't know at that time was there was this huge tongue of ice that was extending about 70 miles down, north and south, in the middle of the ocean. And it was about 5 miles wide. This wasn't an iceberg. This was a shelf. It was literally a broken piece of the ice cap that was floating down like a big finger. Everybody knew that this ice was out there. Today if you get on an airplane, your pilot knows the weather. He's been watching it for 2 to 3 hours at least before he puts on his headphones and sits down in the cockpit. They know exactly what's going on there. They're thinking of contingencies. They stay very well in tune with these things. And back in that day and age, the telegraph system, the Marconi wireless telegraph system was so powerful that they could speak to people all over the Western Hemisphere or from, New York to Europe. People knew, the shipping people knew out there that this big floating ice cap was out there. So there was no excuse for Captain Edward J. Smith to not know where he was headed in this thing. And that's when it began to dawn on me that something's wrong with this picture. This guy it's like driving a car at 90 miles an hour into a brick wall. He was headed directly into this ice cap, not just an iceberg, but a huge floating ice cap. And, we posted that on Bob's website. By the way, you got a great story up there on Federal Jack, too, by the way. I want to mention federaljack.com. Take a look at that if you're up there, folks, on the website, because there's a great post and great story there that Popeye's put up. But also we posted that map that shows you all the ships that were around this huge tongue of ice, the Mount Temple, the Californian, and a number of different ones who were notifying the Californian by telegraph that this was out there. So this was the first thing that began to really make me think, what's going on here? This story doesn't make any sense. Why would this man deliberately head in the middle of the night into this big, huge ice cap? Not just to weed his way through around all these floating icebergs, but right into an ice cap. It didn't make any sense at all. This is part of the story that we've never heard. Anyhow, that was kind of my metamorphosis. Then, as we talked about last night, we saw this book that was out. There was a book written called The Wreck of the Titan. It was called Futility, The Wreck of the Titan by Morgan Robertson. And you can Google Morgan Robertson, and you will find his name. And you'll find the name of the book. And this book came out in 1898, 14 years before the Titanic. And it's the exact script of what happened with the Titanic. This is when it really got to me. I said, wait a minute. This story was told in a novel 14 years before it happened. The ship's name was even the same. And we talked a little bit about the similarities between these two ships. They both had a capacity of 3,000 people. They both hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic, about 400 miles from Newfoundland, virtually the same location. They both had the same amount of pretty much displacement of water. They both went down very quickly. The difference was though, here was the key thing. The Titan hit the ice shelf. The Titanic hit an iceberg before it hit the ice shelf, which is really a strange twist to the whole story, because the Titan went down and almost everybody drowned on it, and 705 people, as you know, got off in the lifeboats, which Captain Smith was reluctant to give the order to lower those, by the way, on the Titanic. But see,
from what I understand, he was like, even the term dithering wouldn't cover what he was doing. His officers were yelling at him, "Sir, we have to do this. We have to launch the lifeboats." And he was just sitting there, just not making the decision. Kind of like Donald Rumsfeld wasn't around to make the decision to shoot down, 77 or Flight 93. But I digress. Go on.
Oh, no. I think you're actually progressing here, because this is exactly what we're talking about. Something's wrong with this whole story. And that's what we're pointing out. As you start to look at this, you realize, maybe he was thinking, we need to have everybody drown or go down on this ship. I don't want to lower the lifeboats. I actually think they hit the iceberg by mistake before they got into the real thick stuff in that ice field that they were heading into. And that's what surprised him. And as you said, said. He was dithering. He was, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with this guy. Why isn't he making decisions? He said, or he knew basically his job was to take everybody on that ship down. This was a mass murder that they were going to make it look like an accident because there were certain people, and we'll talk about those people who you know very well, Popeye, who wanted this ship on the bottom.
Yeah, man, without a doubt they wanted it on the bottom. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss the rest of this interview about the Titanic with Steve Stars. You're listening to Down the Rabbit Hole on the Orion Talk Radio Network, Micro 1650 AM.
We will not rest, and we know what you did that day. Kill your own citizens to advance your ways. All my real patriots stand up and say 9/11 was an inside job. They lie, they scam, they cheat and steal. They plot, they fund, they act, it's real. They watch, they hunt, they punish and kill.
That's right. We're not going to take it anymore. We're tired of the crap. And that's why I come on and I do this radio show. So I can tell you the truth. You can learn and educate yourself, and then you can get pissed off and say the same thing. Okay, welcome back. This is Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm, of course, your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com. And today I'm joined by Steve Stars. Before we went to break, we were talking about the Titanic, and we were trying to let you listeners in on an alternative theory of what happened to the Titanic. And yes, I've heard, I always hear, there's not a conspiracy and everything, Popeye, come on. Well, if you look at things and take a step back, maybe more than one step, maybe 15 steps back, and you look at it from a little bit further away, you'll see the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And you'll understand that yeah, you could say that each one of these little things is a conspiracy because by a technicality, if two or more people are getting together to do something bad, that's a conspiracy. So yeah, I guess by a technicality you could call them little conspiracies. But if you view things as a grander picture and understand that there's a larger agenda and that some of these smaller events that happen are little like a speed bump that they come across in their agenda, and they have to tackle that. So if you understand it from that viewpoint, it makes it a little bit easier to understand how this is all connected. Anyway, we were talking about the Titanic, and Steve was telling everybody about the stunning similarities between a story that was written, I think, what would you say, Steve, was like 14 or 18 years before the sinking?
It was 14 years ago, 1898. The story was called Futility, the Wreck of the Titan. And the ship is the Titan that goes down almost identically to the Titanic. 14 years earlier, the name was Morgan Robertson, the man that wrote it. You can Google that and find the story right online. And
last night we were discussing how it's just like 9/11 with the Lone Gunman series, where their pilot episode was the plane getting hijacked and remotely flown into the Twin Towers to start a war. And it was done by a shadow government, a rogue element within the government. They were going to blame it on terrorists. And Dean Haglund, one of the actors, he's the blonde guy with the glasses. Mm-hmm. I forget his character's name, but he was interviewed by a host on Oracle back in the day, and this guy said basically that the CIA handed Chris Carter the script for that whole episode. So, I mean, it's just if the Titanic sinking, with all the evidence that points to it, and we'll get into more of it, but with all the evidence that points to it, if it wasn't, if the Titanic and 9/11 weren't kind of from the same scripted book, it would be a miracle, because they have very similar outcomes. And of course, the Titanic incident wasn't set up for the war on terror or anything like that, but there were three very rich individuals on the Titanic. And from the research, it shows that the Titanic was actually built, and from its inception, that ship was meant to be sunk with those three men on it, because they needed a way to kill these three guys, because they were blocking the formation of the Federal Reserve. And that's Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor. And you'll see that all three of them died on board the ship. And what better of a way to kill them than a quote-unquote disaster,
Yeah. Yeah, last night we mentioned this, that kind of in the old days of Herod the Great, the biblical evil king of the, Judean period, the first century. He was this kind of guy who would, have a birthday party and invite all of his so-called friends, or most of the time there were people he wanted to get rid of. And he would bring them to a big banquet, and then while they're eating and getting drunk, he would bar the doors and a fire would suddenly start and everybody would be killed and it was an accident. This is the kind of guy Herod the Great was. This is an old tactic. It goes back before Machiavelli. What we're talking about here was J.P. Morgan was the owner, as you pointed out last night, Popeye. He owned the White Star Line. He also owned the company, the International Merchant Marine organization that had the Californian. So he had a whole lot of interest in these shipping lines that were going back and forth. He owned the company that built the Titanic. And he was the one that orchestrated the construction of these three ships, all of which were death traps, by the way, the Titanic, the Britannic, and the Olympic. And he was the one who invited all these people, and actually gave them free tickets. When I mean some of these very wealthy people like John Jacob Astor and Guggenheim and some of the others.
Yeah,
and there
he
was
personally invited them.
Yeah.
Talk about having your hands on the smoking gun.
Yeah, right. And then all of a sudden he had a Lucky Larry Silverstein kind of moment, didn't he? At the last minute, he was not available to me. He was called away, and he couldn't be on the ship and ride in his own special first class, suite that he had built for himself. And then he went back, apparently, and very conveniently put a big insurance policy on this whole thing that had a huge payoff. So, the whole thing stinks of corruption, and it should have been actually brought to people's attention a long, long time ago. But this is one of the problems we have in the United States of America is we have a very short memory and a very low, very low ability to discern what's happening, at least until years and years and years later. We're still trying to get over the Kennedy assassination as of just recently. But, going back to that, you see that the event, the 9/11 event of the very part of the early 20th century was the Titanic. It had to get rid of these main people in order for the Federal Reserve System to be set up, for the IRS to come in, the formulation of the Council of the Council for Foreign Relations, which was developed about that time, didn't become official until 1921, and World War I started in just 2 years later. I am convinced after looking at all of this that this was a death trap. This was a plan. We have the script. The book was written 14 years earlier. There is the coincidences, like we said, are beyond the astronomical odds of chance here. That book was actually probably something that J.P. Morgan got and said, I think this is what we need to do to get rid of all these people. That's my take on it. And look at how it changed things. Bob asked a good question on the show last night, Popeye. He said, why would they, what was the impetus behind all of this? Why? What was the situation? Well, remember, the Rothschild Bank merged with the Vatican in 1822. We had all kinds of problems through the Civil War. We've had a lot of presidents assassinated between Zachary Taylor and even John F. Kennedy, of course. But even between that time, the time period before the Federal Reserve Bank was started in 1913, they were grappling for control over the finances of the United States of America.
And Astor was probably the wealthiest man in the world at the time.
Right.
And those three together, Astor, Strauss, and Guggenheim, had, by those standards then, they were worth over $500 million. Now, if anybody could think, people say, well, that's not a lot of money. Really? This is before the formation of the Federal Reserve. So this is actually before the value of our dollar went,
right,
or the value of the currency, the country's currency. I hate to say the dollar because the dollar's actually the Federal Reserve's a little evil baby. But a $500 million was the equivalent of like $14 or $15 billion in today's standards. So these guys would have, and yes, Astor is connected, like I said last night, blood lineage to all these black nobility families, but they eat their own. If somebody stands in their way, and Astor's the richest man in the world, asking him to give up that, lose half of his riches because they would create the Federal Reserve. He's not stupid. He knows the value of his dollar is going to go instantly he would lose, over the course of time. It would be like giving away vast amounts of his fortune. So he's not going to want to do that. Guggenheim's not going to want to do that. Isidore Straus was, him and his brother owned Macy's department store.
Yeah.
They're super, super rich. So that was one of the biggest problems. These guys were a huge roadblock in the formation of the Federal Reserve. So they had to go. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be back in a few minutes. We're going to go pay the bills. Stick around. We're going to give you some more interesting information about the Titanic, including some information that we ourselves found out last night from a caller.
Right on.
So stay tuned. Welcome back, guys. This is Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. It's Friday, May 20th, 2011. Before we went to break, my guest, Steve Stars, and I were discussing the Titanic, and we were letting everybody into a little secret that many people don't know about, that there's an alternative theory about the Titanic sinking, and that there's actually more controversy behind it than you'd think. It's just kept out of the mainstream media here in the United States, which isn't hard. 6 companies own all of the media outlets. So, Operation Mockingbird, CIA back in the 50s got together and figured out exactly how much money they would need and what stations they would need to take over. So it's not like this is a joke. When you have, and the CIA does so through front companies. That way it's not overt, that they're not out there going, hey, it's us, the CIA. They do so through front companies who the owners of such companies or, board, high-ranking board members are, CIA assets or CIA agents, or quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, retired CIA agents. So, Leon Panetta, he's, head of the CIA right now, and now he's being put into Secretary of Defense, Jesuit. Right. This isn't a joke. The Vatican, people always ask, well, who's at the very top of the pyramid? Well, we really don't know, but I could tell you who's close to the top, and that would be the Pope.
Yeah. Or the Black Pope. Yeah.
Yeah, the Black Pope, the Jesuits. The Pope, Ratzinger's, he's got some power, but he's a joke compared to the Black Pope. And the Black Pope, for people that don't know, they call him either the Black Pope or he's really the general of the Jesuit army, basically. And the Jesuits are like the military wing of the Vatican. So, right. If we want to, we want freedom, we want people in this world. The only way we're going to be able to explore outer space and inner space and the ocean and everything else and be one free humanity is the first thing we need to do is go raid the Vatican. You want to invade a country and bomb the crap out of a country? Let's invade the Vatican. They are technically a country. They are their own country. So why not invade them? They're the ones that have all these secrets dating back 5,000 years.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the connections between the Titanic and the whole situation with Captain Edward J. Smith and his vow, his anything that he would have taken, any vow that he could have been involved with.
Yes, the Jesuit oath. I suggest any of the listeners go look up the Jesuit oath. It is very telling. Last night on air, I read a chunk of it. It's in the article that's on Federal Jack about the Titanic. Just type in Titanic, / Jesuits, and it'll pop up on Federal Jack in our little search bar, or you can just type in Titanic and there's a couple stories that'll pop up. But pretty much it's like, I give my mom just a puppet. And I'm paraphrasing here, but literally this is just like Popeye's paraphrasing of pretty much almost a literal translation now. And Steve can back me up that, I'm a puppet, use me as you will. I'll do whatever you want. I'm pretty much I'm just a puppet in the Jesuit master Black Pope's hands to be used at his desire and at his behest. And that's paraphrasing it, and that's me putting my, my little Popeye, spin on it. But it's not really spin. I shouldn't say spin. That's just my version of what they say, and their thing is actually a little creepier. Mine's kind of a little easier to listen to, as I stumble through it here. But theirs is much creepier, and the whole oath itself is very creepy. The Jesuits are evil. There's a reason they've been kicked out of almost every country in the world.
Yeah.
Go look it up. I'm not kidding, right, Steve? I'm not
That's
kidding,
right. Well, yeah, the 77 countries at least, they were banned even by the Pope. Clement XIV banned them. And that's when, Adam Weishaupt, who was a Jesuit law professor, formulated the Illuminati right after that period of time. There was some discussion.
May 1st, 1776.
That's right. That May 1st day, there it comes up again. Isn't that odd? The day we got Bin Laden.
And this whole period, by the way, listeners, this whole period from like the end of March until about like May 5th is just full of satanic holidays and rituals they do. It's like this period where, the end of March, you got like Minerva's birthday. So they're killing people left and right. They have like their little 4-day ritual. And then you got April 15th, tax day, the sinking of the Titanic. Then you got Hitler's birthday, Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing. I mean, all this stuff happens in these same time periods. It's not a coincidence. One coincidence. First of all, I don't believe in coincidence, but one coincidence, maybe. But when you have 3 or 4 or 5 all in a row, that's not coincidence.
Yeah, they're very much involved in this, in a geometric pattern with everything. And we could go on and on and on about that. But, what we look at so many times is just the basic forensics of these things and see that they don't add up. I mean, you look at World Trade Center 7, and you have to convince your lying eyes that what you're seeing is not a controlled demolition. It's amazing.
How many times have you heard someone say that's not a controlled demolition? And I'm like, dude, you see the penthouse on the top? That whole thing drops down, then the building goes.
Yeah,
That's a controlled demo. They took out the center pillars because the penthouse rested on the core columns of Building 7. And you see the whole penthouse drop down through the roof, and then all of a sudden the rest of the building comes down in like 8 seconds. But no, that's not controlled demolition. That's because fires from a plane that didn't even hit it and jet fuel that was nowhere near the building. Right. So jet fuel brought down the Twin Towers. But let me tell you something. Bin Laden's good.
Yeah, he is.
For a dude on dialysis in a cave with a laptop, let me tell you something. You hit 75% of your targets with military accuracy. We can't even do that in the United States military, and we have laser-guided bombs. Yeah. And you're going to tell me that some schmuck in a cave could do it? I just don't buy it. Like I said about the whole Bin Laden thing, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent on this, but when they came out and they changed the story 18 times, but the first story was that he had a firefight. I made a comment on air. I think it was on Bob's show. I said, "What was a John Woo style firefight? Was he jumping over? He was leaping over his dialysis machine, firing 2 guns, double fisted sideways in slow motion. Come on, it's just such bull crap." So yeah, they lie, they fake stuff. Anyway, getting back to the Titanic. Steve also brought up a really, really good point last night, in talking about the Jesuits, the fact that his name was Francis. What was his last name?
It was Francis Brown. There was a Jesuit priest that was one of the last people to visit the ship, and he was the photographer. There's actually a picture. You can see it in the movie Titanic. You can look at that all over the internet. Captain Smith is looking down from the bridge.
It's a very famous picture.
Yeah, it is a very famous picture. That was the last picture taken of him. He photographed a lot of the people on the Titanic, oddly enough. But now he was supposed to have gone the whole way as a photographer, but he was told to get off at Belfast. And of course, we don't really know what happened, but I would suspect, as we did last night, and you mentioned the thing about the safes, that they probably cleaned out all the purser's safes, took all the gold, the silver, anything they needed, because those folks aren't going to need it. They're going to be at the bottom here in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and they also changed out members of the crew.
Yeah. And no binoculars.
The only guy that had keys to the big eyes, which in case anybody, as a sailor, in case you don't know what they are, big eyes are binoculars that the lookouts would use that you could see at least 9 miles to the horizon with them. Okay, regular pair of binoculars, you can't do that. These things, you could literally see ships 9-10 miles away. And you'll be able to see the superstructure and everything else. As a sailor myself, I know the big eyes are one of the most important things. On our military ships, we had a pair mounted on each side of the fly bridge, let alone the captain having his own pair on the bridge. Yeah. So, I mean, not having a set of big eyes is crazy. And these guys, literally, all their big eyes were locked up in a box, basically. And there was one guy that had a key to it, and he got off. He was one of the first crew members that were switched off at the first port call. And, of course, you got these morons, just like you see in the movie. The ship is sinking, and they're, I don't want to, I'm totally afraid to break the White Star Line property. Don't damage the White Star Line property. So rather than say, look, I'm the captain, I'll deal with it later, break open the cabinet, we need them, he didn't. And that's suspect in itself. Why did he, as the he has the power to do that. He's the captain. Why do you think it was women and children only when the ship was going down and they realized that a lot of people were going to die? That's why they made the decision of women and children only. People don't realize they're on the sea. When you're on the sea, the captain is he is in charge. He's like God on that ship. So he could hold your life in his hands. So to have somebody controlled by the Jesuits like that, and he's got the power of life or death in his hands right there out to sea, that's it. You're done.
Dangerous.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stay tuned.
From the lies they were feeding me. Then I sobered up and realized they were mistreating me. I stumbled out my bed and tried my best to gain some sense of it. The reasons for the cover-up, the reasons for the censorship. Now I realized that Uncle Sam was not befriending me. He was only using me to be friends with the enemy. A presidential terrorist. Ain't that a contradiction? I guess it goes to show the truth is stranger than fiction. But they don't even show the truth when soldiers are missing. I'm only trying to show the truth. Silence is the enemy. Words have power, but actions speak louder. Pretend to be free till you die a slave, a soldier in the desert searching for a ghost in the cave. For the corporation, I run out of patience. Sick of seeing troops sink to die for your lives. Spending dollars in debt, we holler in protest till we have your arrest.
Welcome back, guys. This is the final segment of the Friday, May 20th show, Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. Today I'm joined by Steve Stars, and during the break, we were able to patch up and talk to one of our very good friends, Bob Tuskin, who's now joining us via cell phone from an undisclosed location. Bob, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I had to get out and about and in the field after the show tonight that we did. And last night we did a great show with both of you on the Bob Tuskin Show. And we talked about the Titanic, and we had a caller that brought something to our attention, and we were shocked. We had looked into many different aspects of this that you've discussed on the show tonight and we discussed on the program last night, but we had never considered whether or not the ship was...
Yeah, rigged with explosives, and that's exactly what the caller said, which blew my mind. I know it blew Bob's mind, and I know Steve was even like, "What?" We were very surprised that we had never heard of this, and apparently the Swiss went down and did an expedition a couple years ago, and one of their submersibles, they found out that a 60-foot section, and I believe it was 98 feet or 90 feet across, which was the beam of the ship, and the beam is from one side to the other. That's the width of the ship. Was blown out and missing. The whole keel was gone. Wow. For people that aren't sailors, a keel is a ship's backbone. Okay, all ships have a backbone that run along under the center of them, down at the bottom. That's the keel. That's what allows the ship not to snap in half. That's what gives it its strength when it's going through the sea and up and over waves. Otherwise, if they didn't have that, the ship would just break in half every time it went over a wave. So for the ship to snap in half and the keel to snap the way it did, they said, oh, it's all because of all this weight and everything else. But the ship wasn't actually as heavy as they try to make it sound that it would snap like that. Like if the stern, when it was sticking up out of the water, if it was filled with water, then maybe I could understand there being a big weight difference in it snapping. But the caller last night blew our minds, and he told us that the Swiss found this huge chunk that had been literally blown out of the keel, and apparently it was right in the stern section, and they had literally blown this whole chunk out. Now, a lot of people, we were trying to speculate last night, well, how could they have done that? Well, all you would need is a well-placed sea mine or a well-placed explosive on the side, and it doesn't have to, apparently it didn't have to be very big because, like Steve said, you could sink one of these ships with a sledgehammer just by hitting the steel plates where the rivets were. So, you take a small explosive, which they had back then, people, okay? Nothing new.
Yeah.
You take a small explosive, put it in the boiler room, set it to detonate. That seawater comes rushing in and hits those steam boilers. That's a huge explosion, massive. It would kill pretty much all the engineers down there, and it would blow a hole right in the bottom of the ship and take out the whole propulsion system. It would strike a death blow to the ship in one fell swoop. Then they wouldn't. You want to talk about not being able to steer? You wouldn't have any forward momentum to help. Wouldn't even if you had a big enough rudder, it wouldn't matter. So, I mean, they could have been headed, like Steve said, they were headed for an ice shelf, and the evidence shows that they accidentally hit the iceberg. That the ice shelf that they were headed towards was actually much bigger, and they were headed directly at it. They were going to T-bone this thing, just like they did in this book.
Yep. That's exactly it. And that's what got me, Popeye and Bob. When I looked at that, I said, my gosh, because, see, I'd already come up with a theory. I'd already said, I think he was actually headed to this ice shelf. And, on bobtuscan.com, on your website there, Bob, and, of course, we can put it on your site, too, with the story that you have, federaljack.com, Popeye. There's actually a map there where you can see this ice flow where it is. You can see where the various ships, the Temple Mount, or the Mount Temple, the Titanic, the Californian. There's a ship called I believe it's the there's a couple others in the area anyway. I can't remember all, but you can see where these ships were, and you can see this thing. And this is what was really getting me. This is what really put me over the edge on this, was because when I saw this book, The Wreck of the Titan, where they hit the ice shelf, I thought, this is what I've been thinking all along. They hit that iceberg before they actually hit the ice shelf that they were headed for. That's why Captain Smith, even in the movie, comes up and be dithered around, and he's down there meditating in his captain quarters or something. And he realizes, wow, we've hit something already. We're not expected to hit. He's knowing that they're supposed to hit this ice shelf in an hour or two from now. When everybody's drunk, at 1 o'clock or in the morning, but it's 11:40. They've already hit something, and now there's a real problem, because now the Californians really close by. They're watching all this, and they can respond, and they're not. He's got his first officer saying, let's lower the lifeboats. Let's lower the lifeboats. Hello. Let's lower the lifeboats. And this isn't happening. So the whole thing was a messed up situation. So it's very possible that they may have had it double wired. They may have had explosives in the keel, because this was the plan anyway. They're going to take the ship down. Nobody's going to find it at the bottom of the ocean anytime soon. How it gets down there, it doesn't matter to them. They want everybody dead. That's the plan. This is a death trap. It's designed to be a death trap. And did they blow it up? Possibly explosives? Do we find large pieces of this keel? And I think if we do, we ought to go back down. Somebody ought to go back down and investigate that before that all rusts away. We have the evidence there.
Yeah, and the ship it's been almost 100 years. So in case people don't realize, the ship's been underneath the water for literally almost 100 years now. So it's like paper mache. When you even see it in the footage, you'll see the submersibles go by, and as they go by it, they create a wake, and you'll just see pieces of the ship just flake off. Yeah. So we don't have much time left.
No, we don't.
No.
But, it's kind of interesting that what we talked about, how this whole thing resembles 9/11 so much. It's much bigger than most people realize, because, as we said before, this was their big moment to converge the United States banking system with this big, ugly Rothschild Vatican cartel that had been running Europe for hundreds of years.
And remember, you said last night also how many lawsuits there were.
Oh, yeah.
You were explaining that the reason they didn't show the fact that a lot of what people a little factoid that people don't know is that another J.P. Morgan owned ship was in the vicinity of the Titanic disaster and never responded to the SOS and everything else. They just kind of hung around, and they were sued for not responding. And apparently the lawsuit was still going on back when James Cameron made the movie The Titanic, and that's why he didn't include it. Steve, you could go into that a little bit more. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I mean, Cameron left the entire part of the Californian out. There's an older movie called A Night to Remember that was based on Walter Lord's novel, where there's a lot of controversy as to what was going on with the Californian. And this went on in the courts for years. And when Cameron was coming out with his movie, as I understand, if I got it straight here, there was controversy as to whether they were going to bring up the whole issue of the Californian again. You know what I mean? And this was going right down to the wire before the release of the film, because, they didn't want to dig into that and open that bucket of worms again and start all this controversy.
You got to wonder if he was told to shut up and to keep it out.
Yeah, whatever the case is, he decided not to even include any image or any pictures at all.
It's almost like if he had not wanted to get into it as a filmmaker, he could have just maybe, mentioned the name or something in passing. But he didn't even mention that. It was like it had never existed. You know, until I got into researching the Titanic, you know, more and the whole purposeful sinking and everything of it, I didn't even know about the Californian. So it blew my mind when I found out that it was a J.P. Morgan-owned ship, and it kind of just hung around and watched another J.P. Morgan-owned ship, which you would consider a sister ship if you're owned by the same people. First of all, let me explain something real quick, people. I don't want to hear, oh, maybe they didn't want to get killed or anything. As a sailor, you have an obligation. You know, during World War II, during the battles between the British and the Germans, the British would sink German ships, okay? And as their sailors were all floating around and stuff in the water, like the Bismarck, all right, when they sunk the Bismarck, they went up and tried to rescue as many people as they could. Somebody said they reported a U-boat in the area, and then they took off, and a lot of the Bismarck sailors drowned. But the ones that survived were picked up by British ships who had just 15 minutes before been firing at them. Okay, it's a code of ethics as sailors. Somebody's in the water, they're in distress, you help them. It's a basic human thing. So it's very odd that the ship captain would be like, no, you know, not even worry about it, not talk about it. The radio operator, or actually it's a teletype, whatever it was, the little I forgot what it was called.
Telegraph.
Yeah, that's it. The telegraph. The telegraph operator. He should have answered it. You know what I mean? Why didn't they? And that's actually that's even a bigger chunk of the story, and yet James Cameron conveniently left that out.
Yeah, the whole controversy was left out. You know, it was interesting too, Popeye, that they were gone the next morning. I mean, as soon as it was 6 o'clock in the morning, or as soon as possible, as soon as light was coming up, the Californian beat it the hell out of there because they knew now they were in real trouble. The Titanic was down, and they had to have some excuse. And then they came wandering back in where the Carpathia picked up all the survivors. And this controversy went on and on. I should say that you can actually go online and you can listen to radio interviews of survivors of the Titanic. People will tell you about the Californian. I've even heard stories that people, after the screaming and everything stopped and it got really quiet out there, they could hear the motors and the engines, the steam engines turning over there in the Californian. They could see the red and green port and stern lights there, you know, or starboard and port lights there. They could see the Californian, and those people didn't do anything to help them. You know, this was a mass murder. This was the 9/11 of that time. And it was designed to set up the New World Order's banking system. And to this day, people still don't know what happened there.
Yeah, and it kind of helped give birth to the Federal Reserve System. It's just amazing, isn't it? The deeper down the rabbit hole you go, the darker it gets. Steve, thank you for coming on my show today.
My pleasure, buddy.
I wish I had more than an hour. I'm going to have you back on soon. Bob, thanks for coming on for the last segment and joining us, and thanks for having me on your show yesterday for a great show, and thank you for everything you do, pretty much. So, just check out the shows, guys. We'll be back every Wednesday and Friday and every Sunday.